Resident Evil 4.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
And I'm Seth.
And we're the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. We are the Classic Gaming
Brothers.
What are you overtalking me? That was my slot.
We are.
You can't overtalk me on my slot.
No, I know. I just like to. It's fun.
Jeez. No, you can't. Unacceptable.
All right, you can repeat yourself then.
Doug's screaming at us through the producer's booth.
That's not why he's screaming. He's screaming because we left the coffee maker on again. We're going to burn down our studio again.
Well, if he didn't smoke all those cigars, then we wouldn't have a fire hazard.
Well, yeah, and he puts them out in the coffee, and then we drink the coffee, and it gets gross.
Well, that's where he puts the cigars out.
I feel like we're making Doug seem like he's like an old-timey producer from like a movie.
No, you should just picture him as J.K. Simmons.
Okay, because he wants pictures of Spider-Man.
That's right.
Speaking of, Seth, what have you been recently playing?
Recently, I've been playing Spider-Man Remastered. It was released in 2018, originally for the PlayStation 4, and then came to the PlayStation 5, and then came to the Windows most recently. It was developed by Insomniac Games, and it was published by Sony. It's kind of cool lately. There's been a lot of games that have been PS exclusives that are just coming over to PC, and I'm all for it. I don't particularly like exclusivity, so when they're like, oh, do you want to play Red Dead Redemption on the PC? I'm like, yes. They're like, do you want to play Heavy Rain on the PC? I'm like, yes. They're like, oh, do you want to play Spider-Man on the PC? I'm like, yes, because the only previous Spider-Man that was on the PC was garbage.
Well, there's been a few, but yeah, most of them have been pretty garbage.
And not as good as this last one. I think this one is really...
it's probably the best Spider-Man game I've ever played in my life.
Yeah, so I've been playing it. I've also not been playing it on my PC. I've been playing it on my Steam Deck, which is a PC. I guess it is my PC. It's just not my big tower PC. A Steam Deck is a mobile device that was released by Valve, which is actually running based on a Linux operating system. So it's a Linux base and then has Steam OS as the operating system, but it's all driven on a Linux side instead of a Windows side. And it does a really good job at running pretty much everything in my Steam catalog. So I'm able to play Spider-Man on my couch, which is pretty awesome. We were up in New Hampshire a little while ago, and we were having a Classic Gaming Brothers off-site meeting, and we had the Meme Master General there. We had our producer was there. We had our errand boy who came, and of course us. It was an important staff meeting, and during the staff meeting, I was able to play Spider-Man on my Steam Deck in New Hampshire, which was kind of cool.
That's kind of cool.
And we also played some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yes, we did.
As a team-building environment for the pod. Spider-Man Remastered definitely gets the fan going on the Steam Deck. When it happens, it makes this weird plasticky smell as it vents just heat. But it continues to run fine. I've been really enjoying just swinging around. I'm pretending in my Spider-Man universe that he works for Verizon, and I've been just fixing all the cell phone towers that I guess are owned by Green Goblin. So there's that. And I actually really haven't gotten into the story fully. I've done a couple of the beginning missions, but I'm still right at the beginning. I don't even know if I've even investigated the first thing that I really need to investigate. I've fixed my suit, and that's pretty much it. I'm pretty sure that half of the tokens are restricted from me still.
Yeah, a lot of stuff gets unlocked after you start investigating things, and there's more things you have to swing around to find and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. I also am really happy that I learned how to... I had a difficulty with getting onto an escaping car. The ones that they're the person's speeding and you have to chase this car down. I had some difficulty with that in the beginning, but I have since figured it out how to do that.
Yeah, once you get into the rhythm of the game, I feel like it becomes a very, very good game.
So, Zach, what have you been playing?
Well, Seth, on our trip up to the staff meeting up in New Hampshire, you provided me with a gift for my upcoming birthday. My birthday being at the end of this month of August. And Seth gave me a RG353P emulation device, which is a handheld device kind of similar to the one that Seth has, which goes by a different number. And mine looks kind of a bit more like it almost looks like a Game Boy Advance with analog sticks. Actually, it kind of looks like a Super Nintendo controller with analog sticks and a screen in the middle. And it allows you to play various different games through emulation. And one of those games that I have been playing is on the Mega Duck, because I filled my RG353P with games for systems that I'm not necessarily going to buy anytime soon. Mega Duck being one of those. It's a very hard to find system, so I'm not likely to get a Mega Duck in the near future. The game I've been playing is Snake Roy, which was created in 1993 and developed by Sachin for both the Mega Duck and the Game Boy. In Snake Roy, you play as, I assume, the titular Snake Roy, who is a snake. But I think he's also Roy. Like, I think he's a king, because the picture on the cover shows a snake with a dude's head, and the dude is wearing a crown. And it kind of looks a lot like Leto II from God Emperor of Dune, in that it's a giant, like, worm creature with a person's face. But in Snake Roy, it's just the game of Snake. So you're just going around and collecting, I assume, food and, like, various other pickups, and Snake Roy gets bigger as you collect things, and you have to avoid things. And then after you collect everything, a door opens and you proceed to the next level. It's a very simple game with a very interesting art style. But in any case, I've been enjoying playing games for the Mega Duck. They're emulated really well on the RG353P. They're really, really crisp, and you can kind of get a better appreciation, I think, for the graphics, because the Mega Duck, while I have never personally played one, I have seen videos of them, and the screen never looks very good on those. I mean, it looks almost the same quality as an original Game Boy, which, in all fairness, the original Game Boy screen is kind of bad. To kind of be able to play these games in not only the backlit screen, but also in crisp graphics, it's nice. You get to kind of admire the games a little more, even if they are very simple games. But I'm currently going through the Mega Duck collection, so you might hear some more Mega Duck titles in the future. But yeah, that's Snake Roy by Sachin.
Would you recommend somebody else will play it?
Sure. I mean, it's Snake. I mean, if you like Snake, go ahead, go play Snake Roy.
Find an old Nokia 301010 and boot up Snake right there.
Yeah. Like, if you want Snake and you want to play it on a console that's a bit hard to find, then yes, go get Snake Roy for the Mega Duck. Or if you want to play it on a console that's easier to find, but a cartridge that's hard to find, go find Snake Roy on the Game Boy. So yeah, in today's episode, we're talking about a game that was recommended to us by our good friend Brandon, who often recommends games and topics for the show.
Recently, Brandon recommended us Nick Arcade. He also wanted us to do an episode on Resident Evil, which he sent us that recommendation November of last year, and we said we'll put it in the pipeline. But then we were reminded about it when Brandon wanted us to do Nick Arcade. Thank you, Brandon, for recommending episodes for us. We always appreciate your recommendations, and we do get to them all.
Yes, and we will try to maybe get to the next one that you send us faster, but no promises.
Or slower.
Yeah, or even slower. Maybe we'll wait like 10 years before we talk about the topic. In any case, we are talking about Resident Evil 4, the fourth game in the Resident Evil, fourth numbered game in the Resident Evil series, because there's a lot of games that come in between, but that's neither here nor there. Back in episode 100, we talked about the history of Resident Evil and how that game spawned what became the survival horror genre. Resident Evil as a whole became a really successful game series, and as we discussed in our legacy section for that episode, sequels followed. After the release of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, Shinji Mikami, the producer of the series, announced a new game was in development. This announcement came toward the end of 1999, and from there, development on what initially would start out as Resident Evil 4 went underway. Now, Resident Evil 4 didn't have a very smooth development process, and in fact, 4 games were discarded before the final game was released in 2005. So the game was essentially announced in 1999 and released in 2005, meaning it had a almost 6-year development period between the different versions that were developed and eventually discarded or tossed out completely for what we did eventually get.
But don't worry, as much as that might have been a long development time back then, it is certainly not the long development time today.
No. It is certainly not the longest development time for a game or a game series.
No, it's kind of like mediocre, like middle of the road. Now it's kind of like average.
The first of these projects did actually get released. It wasn't completely discarded, but it wasn't Resident Evil. This was going to be a game that was a bit more action-centric. Noboru Sugimura, who had wrote the story for Resident Evil 2, came up with a story for this game that he wanted to do. In the game, you would play as a character named Tony, and Tony had superhuman abilities that were given to him through use of cybernetics and such. In this game, there was going to be a fixed camera similar to Resident Evil, but Hideki Kamiya, the director of the project, thought that the player didn't look heroic enough when it was put to a fixed angle, and he thought it would be better if it was a dynamic camera so that the camera was moving around and you had different angles so that the character would look more heroic when he was fighting all these different things.
Now, as the game started to take life, it did start to slowly look less and less like Resident Evil. While it had a gothic atmosphere that may fit Resident Evil, focus was more on the combat and platforming. Shinji Mikami would end up stepping in and ultimately deciding that the game was just a bit too different to be a Resident Evil game. However, they couldn't just toss out the project because it was still a pretty cool game that was like being developed. It just couldn't bear the banner of Resident Evil. So it was decided to release the game as just something entirely different. And the main character went from the name Tony to the name Dante. And the game was renamed to Devil May Cry. So if you are somebody who enjoys Devil May Cry, you can thank essentially the rough draft of Resident Evil 4 and thank them that they decided to not scrap it entirely and make a game out of it. Devil May Cry would go on to become its own pretty successful franchise in its own right and spawn numerous sequels within the Devil May Cry franchise. We'll likely talk about Devil May Cry eventually, but what's important now is that essentially Devil May Cry came from Resident Evil 4, so they had to start again on making a Resident Evil 4.
Yeah, like they were like, we had Resident Evil 4, but now we don't, so now we need to make a Resident Evil 4.
Yeah, they're like, well, we still need to finish that whole Resident Evil 4 part, which is why their development went on for 6 years. At the end of 2001, development began anew on Resident Evil 4, and an announcement was made in 2002 that it would be exclusive to the Nintendo GameCube and would be created by Capcom Production Studio 4 as part of the Capcom 5. Now, Capcom 5 were 5 titles that were announced by Capcom as GameCube exclusives, and some of these were really good. Those were PN03, Beautiful Joe, Dead Phoenix, and Killer 7. And then Resident Evil 4 would be the 5th game. This announcement was done primarily to help boost the GameCube hardware sales, which were lagging around back in 2002, which was not making Nintendo happy. The lagging of the sales, not the Capcom 5. They were stoked about the Capcom 5.
Yeah, and Nintendo and Capcom had some exclusivity deals, so they kind of had to figure out ways to help Nintendo during this time.
Right. Because if you didn't have enough GameCubes in the market, no one would buy your game if it was a GameCube exclusive.
So Capcom's plan for Resident Evil 4 at this point would see a returning character, Leon Kennedy, who we last saw in Resident Evil 2, take on zombies in a castle-like headquarters for the pharmaceutical company Umbrella. The game, which was around 40% complete before it was scrapped, featured some first-person elements and a story where Leon gained powers after being infected with a progenitor virus. After this version, which was known as the Fog version, was scrapped, Capcom got to work on another version of Resident Evil 4. This version was shown as part of their 2003 E3 showcase and called the Hookman version by fans of the series. It wasn't like the official name, just everyone calls it the Hookman version. In this version of the game, Leon contracts a disease and has to fight off paranormal entities, such as a suit of armor, dolls, and a ghost-like man with a hook. One element of the gameplay that would stick to the final product was the over-the-shoulder camera for combat. However, some elements, which the gameplay trailer showed, like dialogue choices, were scrapped. About 5 minutes of gameplay footage is included on a Biohazard 4 secret DVD, which came out as a pre-order bonus if you bought Resident Evil 4, which I should also make sure to clarify for people who didn't listen to our last Resident Evil episode. Resident Evil's name in Japan is Biohazard, so that's why you might hear me refer to the game as Biohazard at some point. Now, the Hookman version of the game was scrapped. After this version, there was another version that was worked on called the Hallucination version. This version didn't even make it past the initial concept, but the concept was that Leon would be infiltrating a castle again, and that castle had a laboratory hidden deep within. Inside the lab, a young girl would wake up and must escape, and the game would kind of bounce between the girl and Leon as they made their way out of the castle while dealing with the various obstacles and creatures, which were zombies. This version was actually scrapped due to it just being far too complicated in concept, and Mikami thought it would just be too expensive to develop. However, I will say, if you look at the final product of Resident Evil 4 and all of these different versions, besides Devil May Cry, parts of them all make it into Resident Evil 4.
It evolved out of them.
Right. So, like, we'll talk about the plot, but there's stuff of, like, Leon getting infected. There's the whole over-the-shoulder stuff, and various other elements. You can see where they were coming from. After the hallucination version of the game was scrapped, Mikami decided to step in as director because he was like, we got to get Resident Evil 4 done. This is ridiculous. And he began working on the final version that we would eventually get. He decided that he wanted to shift the gameplay system to have the over-the-shoulder style that they were previously playing around with as the main focus of the gameplay. This change in the gameplay was actually a point of contention with various developers. There are actually reports that there were internal arguments over the style that the game should take, and reportedly some members of the team were frustrated that the game was starting to shift a little bit to become more action-oriented. Now, remember, one of the reasons why Devil May Cry became Devil May Cry was because the tone shifted. I assume people might have been a little nervous that they were like, is this going to just turn out to be Devil May Cry again? Where, like, this whole game is going to, like, the tone is shifting so much.
Oops, we made another game.
Yeah. Mikami insisted to the team that the camera system really did need to be fixed the way that he wanted it to be, behind the shoulder, and he explained to them what his vision of the game was so that they would have a bit more confidence in the product.
Now, the new story that was developed for the game was going to be separate from the previous games in a sense that it didn't actually deal with Umbrella, and instead dealt with a new threat. Mikami actually wrote the entire story in about 3 weeks, mostly because they needed to ship Resident Evil 4 yesterday, and they've been just over there, I guess, to Capcom's view, probably ticking around.
Yeah, right.
They also ended up updating characters like Leon so that they would look tougher but also cool in this version of Resident Evil 4. Because as time has gone on and that they've released multiple Resident Evils, the audience that played the original Resident Evil, everyone's growing up. And you have to change your game, even if it's the same franchise, you still have to change the game so that it's more equivalent to the times of release. So Leon needed to look tougher and cooler to appeal to the newer demographic. The game would introduce new types of monsters like the Regenerators. These monsters were designed to breathe heavily when they walked, so they were heard before they were seen. This would translate well to gameplay because it would allow a player to become aware of their surroundings quicker if they heard certain noises. And I believe by this time there were directional sound. So if you had a system at home where you had stereo or even 7.1 and you heard the sound coming from behind you and you had a 7.1 set up, you would actually hear the sound coming from behind you. So you could actually be more immersed within the game.
Yeah. And we'll talk a bit more about how the actual game plays, but Resident Evil 4 still has kind of what we would call tank controls. So in order to shoot things, you do have to stop, point your gun, and then shoot, though it is from that over-the-shoulder perspective as opposed to fixed camera. But having the sound come from certain places helps you because it will help you line up your shot. So if you walk into a room and you hear a sound coming from what sounds like maybe the room over to the corner, you can turn, adjust yourself, point, and as that thing walks through the door, you can start blasting.
And those things, like the regenerators or other monsters, are also different from previous Resident Evil games because they're not zombies. The people and monsters are created through a parasite called Plaga, which was introduced to the hosts by a company and cult called Los Illuminados. Kind of reminds me of the zombies from Dead Rising.
Oh yeah, but those are zombies.
Right, but they're still done by the little buggy.
Yeah, they are little buggies. They're also kind of like the creatures in Back 4 Blood, which are worms.
Ah. Now, the Resident Evil 4 was announced again in 2004, and it was announced that it would be coming to PlayStation 2 in 2005, meaning that it would not be a GameCube exclusive. It would in fact be a GameCube and PlayStation game. Capcom actually stated Resident Evil 4 did not fall under their exclusivity deal with Nintendo. However, the GameCube version still says only 4 in the corner of the box art, which is only featured on GameCube exclusive titles. Because when you see something that says only 4, your thought is that it's only for that system. You would be wrong with Resident Evil 4. Now, Resident Evil 4 would actually release to the public for money in October of 2005.
That's right. Now, the story of Resident Evil 4 puts you in control of Leon Kennedy, who we last did see in Resident Evil 2. He was the former police officer for Raccoon City. The reason he's a former police officer for Raccoon City is because Raccoon City is currently a smoldering crater in the ground after the US government dropped a nuke on it. But now, Leon has a much more cushy job. He works as a US government agent, and he's tasked on going on special mercenary missions. In this game, he's tasked with saving Ashley Graham, the president's daughter. Ashley was abducted by a cult while traveling in Europe, Los Illuminados, and Leon's mission is to track her down, find her, and bring her home safe. His mission initially takes him to a small village in Spain, where he immediately encounters a group of villagers who want to murder him. He soon finds out that these villagers are infected with the parasite Las Plagas, or Plaga. Leon is captured and injected with Plaga, which slowly begins to infect him. Now, you're kind of competing against the clock, right? You must save the president's daughter, stop everything from happening, all this evil stuff, and preferably fix your problem of being infected. So, Leon's got a lot going for him during Resident Evil 4. And I will say, the Resident Evil games are weird in their own right? Resident Evil 1 is like you go to a mansion, and underneath the mansion is a massive laboratory that's run by a pharmaceutical company. In Resident Evil 2, you go to a police office, and that police office is connected to a massive laboratory run by a pharmaceutical company. And then, in Resident Evil 3, there's this giant monster with a chain gun that's, trying to hunt you down. Weird things happen in Resident Evil, right? Resident Evil 4, I feel is where things get really weird. There's, a sequence where you have to run away from, a machine that's, crushing walls. There's a whole sequence where you're just on mine carts, and, people are dropping into the mine carts, and you gotta shoot them with a shotgun as they, fall in. There's these guys with bags over their head, and they just have chainsaws, and they really hate you. It's a ridiculous game, and it's got some really goofy moments, and I highly recommend playing it. Now, the game, as we mentioned, is played from a third-person, over-the-shoulder perspective, which, again, is different from previous Resident Evil titles, which had a fixed camera perspective. Usually the camera would be up somewhere in the corner of the room, and you would watch your character, enter the room and walk around, and then leave the room, and then it would change position with the next room that you entered in. Now, with Resident Evil 4, you were directly following behind Leon, which allowed you to have a bit more, almost freedom of movement, get a bit more up close and personal with some of the monsters. And it also introduced some new gameplay mechanics, such as we talked about, the sound being a bit more dynamic now. However, there's still tank controls, so you still have to stop in place, point your gun, and shoot, or stop in place and use your knife. There isn't really kind of the fluidity of over-the-shoulder gameplay that we might see in other games that, came from Resident Evil's footprints.
Now, how well did Resident Evil 4 sell? Really well. First of all, let's talk about how they hyped this game up for years. People wanted a new Resident Evil game, and Capcom essentially were teased everybody for years about a Resident Evil game, and they released various different footage that looked very exciting and then changed the footage again to be a different game. So people were ready. When this thing was released, they wanted to know ultimately what was Capcom's vision for this game. And not only were people overwhelmingly positive about the game and critically acclaimed, there are some lists that do say that Resident Evil 4 is the best video game out there. The game also sold excellent. During the first 20 days on release, 320,000 copies were sold in North America for the GameCube, and in December of 2005, 3 million copies for the GameCube and PlayStation 2 were reported as being shipped worldwide. 2007 sales data shows that the GameCube version sold around 1.6 million units and the PS2 around 2 million units. As of December of 2021, the game has sold an estimated 11.4 million copies across the various platforms that it's available on, and it is on a lot of consoles you can get it on. I own it on PC. You can of course have it on PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's on a lot of consoles. And let's talk about the ports now.
Let's talk about them, because of course it was on PlayStation 2. It was literally on PlayStation 2 at launch. But what's interesting is that the PS2 version is kind of cool. It actually came with a collector's bundle that you could get, which had a t-shirt, a figurine of Leon, and a soundtrack. There was also a Resident Evil 4 custom controller for both the GameCube and the PlayStation 2, and it looks like a chainsaw, and it looks stupid, but it is a fully functional controller. It just looks like a chainsaw. Now, a PC version of the game was developed and released in 2007 by Typhoon Games, first in Hong Kong, and then it was released worldwide. A Wii version was developed and released also in 2007, which features motion sensing controls and added reticle for easy targeting. And I've heard that the Wii version is a really popular version. I think I've heard that's probably considered one of the better of the original releases of Resident Evil 4, just because the motion controls really do add something to the game. Another version of the game came out the next year, Resident Evil 4 Mobile Edition, which ran on phones using the Brew OS. This game is actually truncated, only has specific sections of the final game, and kind of like a compressed storyline. A, you're playing it on a phone, and B, because phones weren't great back then. This version of the game was actually adapted into what became the iOS version, and a version was released on the Zibo, which was a Brazilian exclusive console that ran on the Brew OS. And the Zibo was created by Tectoy, who we talked about in our Master System episode.
I was just looking up the collector's edition because I wanted to see how cool the Leon figure looked. It is a pretty cool looking figure. You can get a pre-owned copy of the original PlayStation 2 collector's edition for $350 on eBay and sealed $500. So there was the Brazilian version on the Zebu that was essentially the iOS version, and then that iOS version was later re-released with a separate version called Resident Evil 4 for Beginners, which had 3 levels, counting a training stage, and additional levels could be purchased, because why not?
You know what? I think they really missed their chance with that one, because they called it Resident Evil 4 for Beginners. They should have just called it Resident Evil 4 Beginners, but had the 4 be a number.
Yeah, they should have. And then they should have introduced typing.
Yes.
An HD remaster of the game was released for Xbox 360 and PS3. This HD version was updated as the Ultimate HD Edition for Windows. The game was also released on the PS4 and Xbox One in 2016. In 2018, the game was released on the Nintendo Switch, along with Resident Evil and Resident Evil 0. A VR version of the game was released for the Oculus Quest 2 in 2021, which was developed in Unreal 4, and I would not play that game because that would scare me. Finally, a remake of the game was just announced in 2022. Is that going to be the Ultimate Extreme Edition?
I think the remake is more going to fall in line with what we've seen at the Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes, where it's like completely different gameplay style, probably closer to what we saw in like the Resident Evil 2 remake, like updated over the shoulder, updated levels, updated graphics. But it's kind of weird to think about this game getting a remake, because like Resident Evil 2 feels very old. It's a PlayStation 1 game. Resident Evil 4 has been out on so many consoles. Like I have have Resident Evil 4 on the PlayStation 4, like sitting like next to my copy of Resident Evil 7 and the Resident Evil 2 remake. Like I have a physical copy of Resident Evil 4 for the PlayStation 4. It's just kind of funny that there's going to be a remake of it. I don't know. Like I get it's an old game, but at the same time, it's like, it's literally right there. Probably going to be good. Resident Evil 2 remake was good.
Resident Evil 4 also helped games in another way. The whole over-the-shoulder type situation. Resident Evil 4 was one of the first games to really implement the over-the-shoulder viewpoint. Other horror titles looked at Resident Evil 4 and said, that's a great idea. So titles like Dead Space and The Last of Us took from Resident Evil 4 the over-the-shoulder viewpoint. Other games also, like Grand Theft Auto and the Fallout series, would also utilize this camera style. So imagine playing Grand Theft Auto. I mean, I guess you couldn't play Grand Theft Auto fixed camera, but imagine if they put the camera not where it
Yeah, like imagine if like Grand Theft Auto 5 used the camera technique that like OG Grand Theft Auto did, where it was like up in the sky following you as you're like a little dot on the screen moving around. Kind of want to see that as a mod. That actually sounds fun. But all right, that's Resident Evil 4.
That's going to be our Resident Evil 4 episode, Brandon. I hope it was everything that you expected it to be, or at least if we did fall short of your expectations, we didn't fall that far. We're going to get on to our Retro Rewind section now, where we talk about the games that we assigned each other and talk about whether they hold up or not. Last week, Zach assigned me Zook Hero Z. Zook Hero Z was developed by Fast Fame and published also by Fast Fame, and was released in 1998. And by released, I mean Fast Fame put it into the market, but it probably wasn't endorsed by anybody, because it plays like a beta to Mega Man, starring a Mega Man type character who is not Mega Man, but it's actually like a RoboCop. He's like a cop who gets injured and becomes a robot and fights Mega Man villains. And that's the plot. Since Zach wanted me to play the Japanese version and not the English translated version, I didn't really know what was going on. And I just thought it was some sort of beta Mega Man game. But then Zach told me it was a bootleg. So that means these people, the Vast Fame, didn't get permission by Capcom to put this out. It's a pretty good bootleg though, and it holds up pretty well. So if you like old school Mega Man and you want to play something different, but the same, you could check out Zook Hero Z. And for the next episode, since I gave Zach a lot of edutainment games in the past, I'm going to give him something that has no education whatsoever. And that game is Castles of the Wind Part 1.
The first part?
That's right, just the first part. When you get to the second part, close.
I'm excited to play Castles of the Wind Part 1.
Yes.
Now, Seth gave me last week an edutainment game. He gave me EcoQuest: The Search for Cetus. Cetus? Ketus?
Cetus.
Ketus?
Cetus.
Cetus.
Cetus?
The Search for Cetus, which is an edutainment game developed by Sierra Online. It's an edutainment adventure game, so it plays like other Sierra Online titles like Police Quest or King's Quest. I mean, it's a quest game.
It's also a Scum game.
Yeah, and it runs in Scum, so I could actually play it in Scum VM, which made it really easy to play. But EcoQuest: The Search for Cetus was designed by Jane Jensen and Gaino Hain, and was originally released in 1991. In the game, you play as a 10-year-old boy named Adam Green, who is the son of an ecologist named Dr. Green? I think he's just called Dr. Green.
Sure.
In the game, Adam makes friends with a talking dolphin, and the dolphin says that he is on the search for a sperm whale called Cetus, who is the king of the underwater kingdom of Illyria. It's a very weird plot to a kind of weird game, but the game is, as I mentioned, edutainment. What it is teaching you is how to clean up trash and not pollute the ocean. Literally, the first thing in the game is you watch the sequence of a dolphin swimming around excitedly in the ocean as like beautiful music plays, and it's like jumping and jumping and jumping, and then gets caught in a net, and it, I assume, dies.
No, I think the dolphin that you see in the beginning is the dolphin that is in the that you talk to, that he's rescued.
I thought it was a different dolphin, and I thought it died. And I was no.
I am like 90% sure that the dolphin that is in the intro that gets caught in whatever the thing is rescued by Dr. Green.
Yeah, you don't see it rescued, so that's why I thought, yeah.
Well, you know, you don't always see Dr. Green doing his job, right? He's out there doing his thing.
Dr. Green's a busy man, but
he is.
Yeah, so like right after that, one of the first things you do actual gameplay-wise is it teaches you how you can combine items by cleaning off a gull that has been covered in oil through an oil spill. And then you also like walk around your dad's room as you try to like find different things. And then you go talk to the dolphin, and then you swim with the dolphin. And then the dolphin's like, hey, I'm looking for my king. You think you can let me out? And Adam is like, yes, I can let you out. Dolphin, I just learned, can speak today. And he lets the dolphin out into the ocean. And Adam's response to this is, well, Dad said we were going to let him out soon anyway. And there are no repercussions, I assume, because there's a time jump to 4 days later. And it doesn't say, like, Adam was punished for his recklessness of releasing a dolphin. I just, like, that one part got me in such a weird way. Because in the beginning of the game, there are these kids playing outside. And Adam's like, I don't want to play with those kids. I want to stay inside. And his dad's like, well, you can't stay inside all day, son. And Adam's like, I'm going to stay inside all day, Dad. I'm going to go see the dolphin. And the dad's like, all right, just make sure you follow the instructions on how to take care of that dolphin. Because they're like specific instructions. Like you have to talk to it first, then you have to give him fish, and then you can swim with it. And then if you talk to it again, he starts talking back. I'm just imagining that when you leave the parts that you don't see of this game, of Adam being like, Dad, I let the dolphin out. And the dad was probably like, what? You left the, why? And he's like, well, you said that he was good to go soon. The dad was probably like, yeah, I just say that sometimes. Like, it's just, I don't know. Like, you don't see that moment, but that moment to me, it played in my head. It just made me so anxious for Adam. I was like, he's going to get in such trouble. Anyway, the dolphin comes back 4 days later and is like, hey, I need your help. And then you help the dolphin out. It's pretty fun. Does EcoQuest Search for Cetus hold up? Maybe. If you like adventure games, if you like classic adventure games, I think you'd have a fun time with EcoQuest. It's pretty simple. It's got a lot of the Sierra charm to it. One of my favorite moments is right at the beginning. There's a book on the ground. If you click on it, it says it's an EcoQuest hint book. And then if you try to click on it to read it, it says you don't have time for that. I'm like, that's a Sierra right there. Yeah, it's got that Sierra vibe to it. I recommend it. I'm like 90% sure it could be beaten in like an hour. I didn't get a chance to beat it yet, but I'll probably actually just go back and start playing it more because I was actually kind of enjoying myself. So does EcoQuest The Search for Cetus hold up? Yeah, it holds up in a weird sort of way. But that will do it for today's episode. Brandon, thank you very much for the recommendation. Always appreciate it. If anyone else wants to recommend something for us to talk about, you can send an email to classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us via our Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Our Facebook and Instagram are Classic Gaming Brothers. Our Twitter is CG Brothers Pod. We're also on Twitch at Classic Gaming Brothers. We don't stream a lot, but we're there. Also, you can check out our website, classicgamingbrothers.com. That's where we have all of our merch and also our episodes that you can listen to at your leisure. Anyway, that being said, I think that's everything unless I'm forgetting anything. Seth, am I forgetting something?
No, I think you got it all.
All right, I'm pressing stop.
Oh, wait.
Yes?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That is right.